Welcome back to M&A in the Trades, the podcast where we dissect the intricate world of mergers and acquisitions in field services. I'm your host, Yassine, joined by my awesome co-host, as always, Giner Ozgul. Giner, how are you doing today?
Good, you see. Always good to see you.
Yes, well, I'm excited about today's episode, Giner, because we're going to be tackling the complexities that come with the word consolidation in M&A and why it often fails to capture the true depth of the process. So I'm also pumped to have with us today Robert Sheesley, the CIO of the Wrench Group. And Robert, is a technology visionary leveraging IT shared services as a value creation lever to really differentiate the Wrench Group's value proposition as a platform in the market. He'll be shedding light on how to navigate the tightrope of post merger integration without letting platform companies implode. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to a very spirited and robust discussion about the topics you just referenced.
Absolutely. And Rob, I'm super inspired by all the wisdom and insights you share on LinkedIn. You're pretty active on the platform, and uh, probably no week goes by that you're not winning an award or you're on stage. So you're quite the influencer in the industry, especially in the CIO circle. So I'm really honored to have you today with us. So before we dive into the episode, Rob, could you maybe give us just a quick background about who you are and what you do?
Certainly, yeah. I've been Chief Information Officer now with Wrench Group for a little over 6 years, and I guess kind of goes back to 2016 when I exited Mylan. I was leading global enterprise architecture at Mylan, and we
Mm.
had somewhat of a leadership regime change, if you will. I'm certain this is not an unfamiliar occurrence or situation. It happens quite frequently. And our CEO, Michael Smith, who I've learned so much from in those 3 years
Mm.
out at Mylan, went to the business side and was running innovation. New CIO comes in, wants to do things a little bit differently. So I
Mm.
exited Mylan and went back to work with private equity as a independent consultant. Was working on a honey merger up in Minneapolis and Ann Arbor, and I got a
Mm.
call from a good friend of mine to assist him with Wrench Group's software selection. There were
Mm.
four brands at the time. Wrench Group was the idea of event, a combination of InvestCorp and Ken Haynes, who was at the time president and owner of Coolray in Atlanta, and they created this four-brand um, organization that has become somewhat of a juggernaut in the industry since that time in 2016. I landed at Wrench as a consultant, helping them with their software evaluation and selection in the summer of 2017, and then was asked to come back to Atlanta to help them with their migration of those four brands onto the common homogeneous operating platform, which is
Which I
ServiceTitan.
think very easy to do. Very, very
Oh
straightforward.
yes,
No
yeah,
problem.
it's a light switch. Um, and then, Ken asked me if I would consider taking on the CIO role, and we reached an agreement. And here we are 6+ years later, and things are going quite well.
Well, beautiful. Look, I think you bring a very diverse background and interesting, the consulting world, private equity, technology, that, nexus is quite interesting, and I'm keen to dive into it. So, really, Rob, so, during one of our prep conversations, we talked about the problem that comes with the word consolidation and how it may lessens the impact of the collective corporate layer. Want to maybe start off by diving into that a little bit?
Certainly, I mean, this is a pretty unique circumstance. I cut my teeth in M&A back in '97. Check.
Mm,
96. I had just left Electronic Data Systems, where I built my technology capabilities and background. I was not a technologist coming out of grad school.
mm,
I think I may have passed a COBOL class in college and did some statistical analysis. But coming out of Electronic Data Systems and joining Anderson Consulting, I was assigned to build a PMO for Frontier
mm,
Communications, who had acquired 7 smaller regional telephone companies. So that's where I cut my teeth in M&A. And I've seen quite a lot in those years. Spent 3 years at Healthcare Service Corporation, integrating Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois and Texas, which was I guess it was a 3-4 year endeavor. Very different cultures, Chicago and Dallas. And so I've seen a lot. And with Wrench Group, and back to your comment about, the challenges around consolidation, specifically in the middle market, our going in position has always been, we are going to preserve the autonomy of the acquired companies that we're bringing into the Wrench family. Meaning our going in position is do no harm. We don't want to mess with the secret sauce of these companies that have had respectable growth and have done well. Our perspective is, we want to identify and partner with organizations that are on fire, and then we're going to pour jet fuel on that fire by taking the responsibility of some of the shared services like HR, marketing, F&A, IT, so that the locations, the brands can focus on the things that they do so well, and that's really the service to the homeowner. So our goal is to, lean in with our acquired companies. There are certain, I don't like to use the word mandate, but there are certain non-negotiables. We're going to, migrate them to our operating system, our operating platform, which you both know is ServiceTitan. We're going to migrate them to our F&A system. We're going to migrate them to our infrastructure in the cloud model. And cybersecurity, non-negotiable, data privacy, non-negotiable. But as far as the other orbiting supporting systems, although we have been in a routine and a cycle of application portfolio rationalization, we just onboarded InfoBip as our standard communication platform service. So all of the smaller relationships that our location had with SMS providers, communication providers, will ultimately go away, and InfoBip will be serving all of our locations. We're in the early stages of doing that right now, and InfoBip has a tremendous history. In the last 3 or 4 years, they've grown tremendously. They're doing some great things in utilization of AI. So we're excited about that partnership. But as far as the consolidation piece with the locations, we move fast like a turtle, with the exception of infrastructure. We move fast like a rabbit with infrastructure, because we have to get them on our multi-factor authentication. We got to get all of our endpoint security protocols in place, and like I said, those are non-negotiables. But for the remainder of those operating systems, including ServiceTitan, we work with the locations on the timing of that. Obviously, we really don't touch any of that. We maybe do some pre-work during the high season, but we really look at the shoulder months to, move the needle on the migration onto what we would call our Wrench standard platforms.
Hey Rob, what's the change management of that look like, right? So 'cause we have the same approach, the do no harm approach.
Yeah.
Ourselves, and we're a very seasonal business in roofing. From March to November, we don't touch anything. We kind of leave, the structures alone. And we think the same way. We're kind of cutting over to a different ERP in some of our businesses because, as you know, a lot of these individual businesses are on QuickBooks and things like that. But I feel like the change management itself is a discussion that's the wrapper around the work. What have you guys learned about that has been really positive, that's helped you guys get better at this?
Yeah. Geiner leads off with his first question with the hardest. He's throwing a 101-mile fastball at me, and he's asking me to hit it. No, I appreciate that question. It's a great question, and it's highly relevant. Because I had some pretty high caliber, early career background with electronic data systems and then Anderson, when we were at Andersen, we had an entire competency group devoted to organizational change management. So I got the benefit, even though I was a technologist, of working with those folks, learning from them. I remember specifically in 2008, I was leading the merger of two large dental health plans, one in Boston, one in Milwaukee. Why this is relevant, I'm getting to the answer to your question about organizational change management. And I was promoting a team of OCM resources to walk alongside our technology team and our process engineering team that we brought to our clients. And there was some hesitation, I guess, from the executive team and the board on why we would need these resources called OCM professionals. And I remember this distinctively, having a conversation with the then CEO of DentaQuest and several of the board members. I referenced a Harvard Business Review study that asked 100 CEOs to think about their last large system implementation, and what is the one thing that they would change if they had a do-over. And 89% of the CEOs said that they would make more investment in organizational change management, because the acceptance of the change, the application of the new processes did not go as well, because they didn't make that investment in OCM, meaning they didn't take the pulse of not just the leadership community, but other communities within the enterprise, mid-management, individual performer. So one of the things that we do when we onboard a location or a brand that has been acquired, and we start the process of walking them through our methodology, what's first, what's second. I mean, out of the gate, the first thing we tackle is data, and I mentioned infrastructure. So those two are kind of like in parallel, because
you took away my next hard question for you. The next one was going to be data related.
Yeah. So, I mean, to cut to the chase on the OCM, we have an entire methodology. I mean, I helped create Andersen's methodology coming out of the Nations Bank merger, and then HCSC was Andersen's next big, large merger that I led the TMO office for. And so I've along the way, Andersen, Alvarez and Marcel, my experience at Westboro Partners, I've gathered all of this knowledge and information. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't apply some of that to our own Wrench Group methodology. I mean, we have an M&A playbook, and plus or minus 20%. We repeat it again and again and again and again. But a lot of our acquired companies are more unique than others. So sometimes that you gotta dig into that 20% to really understand what their challenges are. So when I first arrived, back to the OCM, and we can talk a little bit about data too. When I first arrived, I laid out this methodology and got buy-in from a lot of my C-suite colleagues as we acquired companies and we successfully migrated them to these platforms. We do stakeholder interviews out of the gate. We apply stakeholder OCM, meaning we interview not only the senior leadership team of the acquired company, but the middle management, and then we plot their points of view based on 7 categories of change acceptance. And then we define where those scatter plots are divergent, and we work to bring them together, right? Part of that is process harmonization. So going into an organization and say, oh, you're using QuickBooks, you're using, we had one acquired company that was using a operating system called, I'm going to mess this up, Tiger Paw, I think it was called. No joke. And so, we're moving them from these, rubber band and paperclip, I don't want to disparage Tiger Paw, but, these systems that are not terribly sophisticated onto a Service Titan and intact F&A platform, their processes are going to change. So we dig in early to do a current state process analysis against front end, middle office, and back office processes. And then we help build through visualization what the processes will look like once they go on the ServiceTitan, Intact, UKG for health, for human resources. And then we always, before we go live, after user acceptance testing, we have conference room pilots. So people can get acclimated to those new processes. They already have the design of the new process. And listen, it's not as simple as what I just described, as I'm sure you're aware. You got to win the hearts and minds of folks. So it's very relational.
Yeah. So I would love to maybe double click on this. So Rob, so let's just to start with, who owns OCM? Like if we would want to define the RASI, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. Who owns the RASI, and what does the structure of that OCM typically looks like?
Well, I would say that because I talk about it mostly, I shouldn't own OCM. I guess I share the ownership of OCM with our chief operating officer.
So at the individual portfolio companies.
So hey Rob, maybe I'll say it the way I've said it when people ask me that same question that you've seen, and still react to this. For me, it's always been like the buying company, the leadership of the buying company that's assigned to the integration activities of the company you're integrating. We all share in that ownership, in this case, of the OCM, because it's a big deal. It has to be for all those people involved, right? You can't go to the detriment of, well, you're on QuickBooks and your AP side is just unsophisticated. Like comments like that, when our teams, even if they do it unintentionally, cause really bad effects, I have seen, with trust than with the company you're trying to integrate. So I always say it like, hey, whoever that project team is usually like 4 to 5 people you've seen that really are driving the crux of that. Like essentially where it's coming from then is the leadership, like Rob, myself, others are saying to those 4 to 5 people, you better make sure you're listening to that business as you're doing this integration process.
The voice of the business. Yeah,
absolutely.
The voice of the business.
Yeah. When we show up, there's 3 things that we talk about, or 3, I don't know if you want to call them mantras or code of operation. Do no harm, right? Think globally, act locally, right? And the idea of we're here to do it with you, not to you. And I really refined that throughout my consulting career, because all of a sudden 20 consultants show up for a merger transaction. You could immediately alienate some significant subject matter experts that you have to be successful. So this whole idea of we're here to do it with you, not to you, has to resonate and permeate throughout the entire integration process. And when you look at what we're integrating, or what we're doing with the locations, the brands that we acquire, it is not 3 months and done. This is sometimes a multi-year journey with them.
Right.
We've got data, we've got infrastructure, we've got core systems, we've got cybersecurity, we got data privacy, and toward the end of what we would call maybe the acquisition journey, right? When I landed here, we set out, and I got agreement across the entire executive team that our journey was going to be stabilize, optimize, transform, disrupt. So as the acquired companies are coming through, right, from entry point, the first thing is to stabilize.
Maturity levels, different maturity levels.
Absolutely. Yes. The next thing is optimize. So what that means is, we've got 28 brands right now. When you look at certain business capabilities and functions in the organizations, we have best practices. Inventory is a great example. We have inventory management best practices at certain locations. Well, what we do post stabilize is we then go to the locations and the leadership, middle management, and we start having conversations about, things that we know can be done better, more efficiently, perhaps more effectively, and we offer to provide those locations a view into how some of our other brands are doing it. We don't say, hey, you're going to do it like Parker and Sons. But we do plant the seed, and in collaboration with our SaaS partners like ServiceTitan, Baker Tilly, who is our integrator for Intact, and others, we provide knowledge capital and information so that they can make their own decision on whether or not they want to tackle that or not.
Makes sense. And so Rob, you said you have 4 maturity levels or stages of the journey.
Right.
Stabilize, optimize, transform, and disrupt. And I think it's sometimes a little bit aspirational to even think about disruption, because in my interaction with tens of private equity executives, sometimes people really struggle to even get through that first phase. So if we want to just focus in a little bit more on stabilize. So first of all, how do you define stabilize, and what's the exit criteria? When do you know that you've stabilized? And maybe we can talk about the obstacles that you have experienced, and to you both as well, Gsåhner. What are some of the obstacles that you have to overcome, or that you've come across, in order the hurdles you need to come to hop over and resolve to really be reach that stable state, steady state?
I would, for me, I'll say this. One of the first obstacles, is these teams are looking for fractures in this. Like, they don't know it, but unintentionally, as you go to acquire a company, the people on the other side of that acquisition, they're looking for mistakes. They aren't
mistakes where? Mistakes in your process?
Just mistakes in general of the whole thing, right?
Right.
How you pay me, a payroll disruption, an integration here, the way you talk to my salesperson. They're literally hanging on in their mind. They have created a narrative for themselves, which isn't true. Rob will tell you this, and I'll tell you this confidently. Like, we go in there with the best of intent to help them, right? And then they start to find these little things, right? And in some of them, we mess up, full disclosure, and we have to apologize. And some of them are just narratives they create for themselves, right? So for me,
shouldn't that be an expectation? Like, there will be mess-ups. So where is this mindset coming from, that I'm waiting for you to make a mistake? Why is that mindset,
okay, so you are a person that, I always boil it down to the lowest common denominator. You got a warehouse worker, right? Warehouse worker's been working for this family for 20 years, right? And they have coffee every morning. They go to the Christmas parties together. They saw their kids go through college. There's like this very strong connection there, right? A very strong personal connection that has taken years to build, right? So then the first time Rob or myself go into that warehouse and we say, hey, your sticker should be blue instead of white, right? Because blue is a color your eye picks up on more, or something like that. Immediately you're coming in here and you're telling me how I should do my job, and we're really not. We're trying to help them be better, right? With things that we've learned from our other businesses or branches, using Rob's point, and bringing that best practice across. But to them, it's a threat, right? It's immediately a threat. So for me, it's always like, part of the stabilize for me is, how do I over communicate that we always have the best intentions here, right?
I love it.
Like, that has to be
and how does that communication plan look like for you, Rob, going into that IT organization? So what's your communication to neutralize the perception, or lessen or overcome that perception of you're coming in to disrupt my what I think is optimal way of doing this thing, which what you, to your point, what got us to be where we are today and why you bought us in the first place, to kind of transition them how do you overcome the current state? How do you get them to say, yes, we need to change? What we're doing now? How do you get them to the conclusion that what they're doing right now is not optimal and it has to change for the greater good? How do you,
Right.
what's that communication plan?
Right. So we are very purposeful about this idea of organizational change management. So out of the gate, when we have the kickoff meeting with the locations, I talk a lot about the change acceptance curve and the stages that everyone goes through when they encounter change that is not pursued. So change that's thrusted upon them. I mean, the curve has, many dispositions: awareness, confusion, doubt, frustration, learning, acceptance, hopefully at some point, belief, and then motivation. And that motivation piece is actually, so getting to that, those organizations that we've taken through the curve, and our goal is to flatten that curve, because oftentimes, when you start out with awareness, we don't want to stay in confusion and doubt and frustration for very long. We want to flatten that. And the way we do that is apply this idea of stakeholder management, two-way communication, having resources available. I mentioned the process harmonization. I've hired process engineers to work specifically with the subject matter experts at the locations, which, oh, by the way, we build a catalog of in collaboration with our brands that we acquire. So the one way is through purposeful stakeholder management as a component of our OCM. The other way is, imitation or flattery. Yeah, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And so if we could find brands that, from a metrics perspective, are above and beyond the average or the norm in our organization, and we can use the leaders of those brands to help us navigate some of the Heisman stiff arm that we might get from a new acquired company when we go in and say the label should be blue, not orange. That also helps a great deal, because we're kind of beginning with the end in mind and saying, and I'll just use Parker and Sons. They're our largest location, and they've been very active in working with corporate IT. They're probably one of the more collaborative, I think, locations in our family of brands. But if we could say, look at what Parker and Sons is doing relative to conversion rates compared to the field. How would you like to work with us to get to that point, or
creating a vision of a better future based on your current state, and that's aligned to what you define as value? Yeah.
I mean, it's the what's in it for me, that thinking ahead of what's in it for me. Who doesn't want to improve their conversion rate? And if we have things in place that are helping certain brands that have been open and receptive to process redesign, or using pieces of functionality of our core operating platform that they otherwise may not have devoted time and attention to, and that can be held up as one of the drivers of why the conversion rate is doing so well. One of the great examples, and I just got done talking with someone about that, because we're exploring a lot of different alternatives as it relates to online scheduling. 14, 15 of our brands are using online scheduling today. That was a bit of that was one of those things that we were very committed to getting out to the consumer world by meeting the consumer where they're at. The Gen X, Y, and Zers don't want to do this to make an appointment. They want to do this to make an appointment. And so we rolled out this online scheduling tool, and some of the brands use it better than others. And so what we try to do is we try to negotiate, and that's probably not the right word, but we try to work with those brands that aren't using it as well as others to see the metrics. We get a report every day, job bookings online. And to the degree that we can use some of our brands that are really doing well in certain metrics as examples of how you can improve, how you can go from stabilize to optimize and possibly even transform, to the degree that we can have those conversations. And, Geiner hit the nail on the head. Those conversations aren't always easy because, a lot of the people in these locations, because these were often family businesses that grew like wildfire, they've been working together for 15, 20, 25 years. So here comes Rob Sheesley and his team of, college graduates, that, profess expertise in process excellence. We've got to, again, I use the term win the hearts and minds of these folks. There's a lot of energy that needs to go into the relational piece of it. In addition to saying, look at Parker & Sons and what they're doing with online scheduling. And we can help you get there also if we can work together and not necessarily replicate something that a brand is doing, but be open to how they're doing it.
I love it. Yeah, this reminds me of Lewin's change management method, where there are like three stages to it, right? You have to unfreeze, then you need to transition, and then you need to freeze again.
Right.
And in the unfreeze stage, like you said, first you gotta communicate the need for the change. Why should we change? Like you said, create a compelling future, a future state of sorts. And then how do you start? And then you need to challenge the current state, challenge it, and encourage people to just let go of the old ways of behavior and process. Like you said, better conversion rate, right? Why you should change is because we know you can make more money, and this is how you, as an IT team, or through your marketing automation or Salesforce enablement or whatever, you can influence the sales team to increase their conversion. And here's, and I'm challenging this current condition because I know there's an existing model that works, and here's a case study, here's an example, but they're doing things differently. Here's the plan, right? And here's the plan, and then you create a compelling reason for the change to motivate them to participate, and then move to the change phase. So when you move to the change phase, go ahead.
1 second. In that, and I heard the 3 models. I've heard different models over the years. People are people too. Like there's a step in there that I call it the grieving step. Right?
Yes.
Just like when someone passes away, people need that grieving time. Yes. You need to allow them a little bit of time to grieve, right?
Accept
that this change is going to happen, and you need to be supportive during the grieving process, not like, hey, you got to get over this tomorrow. You got to say, hey, check in with them, see where their heads are at, see how you can support them, maybe clarify the message again that this is a better change for them, not like, hey, you're coming with us or we're leaving you behind. And maybe at some point you get there, to be honest, because they can't get past the grieving process. But I think it's really important that you need to allow them a little bit of time in that grieving process, that this change is something that's fundamentally going to change the way they think about work going forward, right?
Yeah.
I love that. So once they've accepted the change, or once they've accepted that change has to happen, and then you move into that transition phase, how do you support that transition phase? Like, what are the tools? What are some of the mental models that you put in place that to help in that transition? I mean, you mentioned process mapping. So what are some of the tools to continue, make sure that there's continuation and, we don't, stop halfway through. So how do you continuously support that transition phase?
So what we have a number of competency areas within, and I can only speak, I can speak, about IT. We have a number of competency areas that our organization is built around. Enterprise applications is one of them. Enterprise architecture, data privacy, cybersecurity, infrastructure. And so once we get the organization to the end of stabilize, if you will, if there is an end, we try, we start to incorporate some of the folks in those locations subject matter experts into these practice areas. So they, we've got these practice areas doing things all the time to support the production environment, right? From a systems perspective and an infrastructure perspective. One of the areas I can speak to specifically is enterprise information management. So we launched this enterprise information management program back in June of 2019. And the whole purpose of that was to start to normalize data across our brands so that our reporting function, our business intelligence function, was comparing apples to apples to apples across all of our locations. Well, as you can imagine, I mean, I mentioned we start with data and infrastructure in parallel when we first kick off our acquisition methodology, integration methodology. Once you get through stabilize, there's much more work to be done, right? Now you're part of the family, if you will. So, we want you to come to dinner every Sunday and break bread and talk about, what's next on your path to data normalization so that you can get onto the business intelligence platform, quicker and start to even influence where that, those KPIs are headed. And so part of the process is, I wouldn't say it's altogether that formal, although the enterprise information management immersion probably is, because what we do is we ask for data stewards and BI ambassadors from the locations. The challenge is, back to, the question earlier about the obstacles. I mean, we're not placing people at the locations that only have the title data steward or BI ambassador. It's people who have operational day jobs that are raising their hand and saying, I'd like to participate in that role. Many times, when we are done with the stabilized phase, if you will, typically we already know who the data owners are at the locations. Who's the go-to person for F&A data? Who's the go-to person for inventory data? And so we help to kind of usher in or steward the acceptance of this role part-time to support our corporate team. That
and you give them a role.
Indeed.
Yeah. And that's how you start getting buy-in into this whole is really the encouraging the involvement and the participation in that integration process, so they buy in, right? If you do it right, you contributed to it, so it's really harder to let go of something that you co-created. And that helps in reducing resistance. And and then there's the other side, right? So there's the IT leadership, data owners, right? But that probably is 5% or less of the total members of the organization. How do you cascade the transition through during the change process, and more specifically training? What role does training play, and how do you roll out training to onboard the thousands of users into a new ERP or new BI or new marketing automation or whatever?
So we don't have a corporate training function, so we rely a lot on our SaaS partners, our technology partners. So ServiceTitan is a great example. I've mentioned them previously. We utilize their training function in their organization in collaboration with some of our subject matter experts within corporate. Because I mentioned we have an enterprise applications group, right? Their whole world is being good stewards and to some degree subject matter experts of some of our applications, our business applications. ServiceTitan, M&AITT, Adobe. We onboarded Adobe 3 years ago, and we have an entire segment of our enterprise apps group, which is just marketing technology. All those resources do is devote their time and attention to our marketing technology platform, which is predominantly Adobe. I mentioned we onboarded Info as our communication provider. But from a training perspective, we rely heavily on our vendors, our partners. And we do a lot of, to the degree that we're able, kind of informal training. So we'll host sessions,
Right.
COVID, forced everybody
Classroom,
to
Zoom.
go remote, right? But
Yes.
it was also, fast forward to 2024, the acclimation of people to have video conference meetings and attend informal training sessions via video conference. Prior to 2020, we weren't doing a whole lot of that.
No, at least not a lot in the service industry. And I remember, one of your implementations, sometimes the biggest struggle is not so much the corporate folks. Maybe the onboarding is a little bit easier because they're sitting on their computer. But how do you onboard the field organization, whether it's the sales organization or the technicians? What was your experience in onboarding the field workforce into a platform?
Yeah,
Lessons learned there.
I think it's what Rob says. Just to be really clear, I'll be supportive. I also want to say something. There's no panacea in training. This whole you'll hear from people like, oh yeah, you could just train everything, create a bunch of YouTube videos, put everybody through it, and have an LMS system to track their compliance to it, and I've tried variations of all of that. It doesn't work the way everyone thinks it does, right?
At least not as advertised.
Well, the limitation is always that people are human beings, right?
Right.
And there's a sense of confirmation that needs to happen in the training process. That's always going to be personal, right? Hey, where are you at with this process that we're putting you on this new system? Were you able to log in? How'd your first experience go? Did you get stuck somewhere? Like that feedback loop in the training is really important because it does two things. One, it validates whether or not they really were trained. Like it does a little bit of a rudimentary check-in. The second one is like the human side of are they struggling starts to come out, right? And if they are, then we can provide support for that. And none of the technology tools or training processes, I would argue, are going to fix that because you can have I say this differently. Like, so I'll give you a sense. My mother went for a period of time, worked in a hospital in environmental services, right? And every year they had to do a certification of online training of different subsets of things that could happen in a hospital, right? But it's interesting. Every year it was kind of the same thing, and she would still forget half that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
It's formal training. It was really well put together, but she's a human being. And what I'm saying here is the feedback loop is really important. Like you got
awareness alone doesn't lead to behavior change, and this is something we just learned. Again and again, implementing Lean Six Sigma here. Just giving people a bunch of videos and making them aware doesn't mean they're going to change their behavior. And I guess this takes us really to the, what I call the third phase, the refreeze, or where you want to make that change permanent. And I think this would be a good point to close out this very rich episode on probably one of the most important aspects of any implementation or integration, and that is change management. How do you make it stick? So maybe what's some of the biggest learning from you, Rob, and from you, Gsåhner, on how do you make it stick? Start with you, Rob.
Sure. So one of the ways that we have been able to make it stick is to have those recurring competency or specialty area meetings with those subject matter experts post stabilize, post acquired acquisition integration. And as I mentioned,
at the local level, like at the add-on portfolio company level.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
So we have a monthly meeting with ServiceTitan and our locations to talk about what's working, what are they now embracing as a piece of functionality that they want to use that hadn't been used previously. One of the biggest challenges early on, and I'll be specific about this very briefly, is membership management, maintenance management, maintenance membership. a lot of the organizations were using, quite frankly, Microsoft Excel to manage their membership, right? Now, along comes ServiceTitan, they have a membership component, but there's a lot of setup that has to go with that to make it work. And some of the brands just weren't willing to invest that time early on during the integration, the migration to ServiceTitan, and they decided to pass on that. Well, back to when you see peer organizations using it successfully, and because we have KPI dashboards that shows all of our locations and the lagging indicators and their leading indicators, it's almost a competition across our enterprise. So when you see other locations moving the needle on some of those indicators, we've had locations approach our corporate team, IT team, and our partners like ServiceTitan saying, hey, how do we do that?
And I love that.
And that has been very helpful. But I will say one other thing, especially when it comes to technicians, because these guys are in the field, they got their iPads or their tablets or whatever. And yes, we do bring them in for training. We do the conference room pilot that they have to participate in. Sometimes that conference room pilot is 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 4 weeks. For one of our brands in Charlotte, it was 8 weeks. And that is really a time period for everybody to ask their questions, right? But what we did successfully is we tapped what we believed to be early on those technicians that just got it, or who have used the platform in their previous lives before they showed up at one of our acquired companies.
Promoters or the ambassadors, identify a group of ambassadors to cascade that among their peers.
And that has been a very effective technique for us, is to tap those people as ambassadors to help the others come along with.
Yeah. So if I would summarize it, call support, ongoing call support, developing local SMEs at the add-on portfolio company level who are leadership enablers or enablers at the leadership level, create competition through showcasing the success, and then identify ambassadors at the frontline or part of in-group ambassadors to really socialize the idea. I love that. So Gunnar, any lessons from your implementations?
So very similar to Rob. My only adds are, you want to make sure you go back to people and thank them for their work, right? That they put into it. The teams that are integrating and the teams that are on site. You want to acknowledge. You also want to acknowledge the areas of opportunity that you picked up on that you can improve the process for the next time. And you want to make sure you set that as a milestone to review, right? Like, hey, what did we learn? What could we do better? Especially with the subject matter experts, so that the next time we continually get better in this, right? There is a memorialization of the process that's going to happen, at the site level, but in perpetuity, as you bring this forward, it should always be more of a continuous improvement thing, right? Like, this is things that we learned we should do better. But outside of those things, I think Rob summarized it really well.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. We have after-action reviews after every acquisition integration, where we, it's like a 3-week process. We provide them the template and the questions. What were the objectives? What did we do well? What could we have done better? What did we miss? Those sorts of questions. And then we come together as an internal wrench group team to talk about the responses. And then we bring our key vendor partners in for a second after action review meeting to, get their points of view, because they may have seen things or observed things or thought about things after the fact that we could do better, that we didn't apply. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I did mention that, and we do we're very purposeful about that after action review.
Yeah.
This and that's a wrap. I mean, amazing. I started this episode thinking, I want to tackle all these different areas of technology and IT integration, but I'm so glad that we zoomed in on change management, because you can have the best tools and buy the best software out there, and but if you don't nail that change management aspect of the process, which is really the underlying enabler of any successful integration, nothing else matters. So Rob, I appreciate you for joining us today and imparting on us your wisdom and hard earned lessons. And Giner, your perspective and your experience always enrich these conversations. So thank you both for joining us on today's episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, or if you have any questions, give Rob and Giner a shout out in the comments, and feel free to reach out and leave any comments below. And with that said, thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, team.